So yeah, I'll just start with a quick introduction of myself, and then I always like to start my presentations with questions. So hopefully you guys are aware of what you want to talk about. So I'll just start jotting them down here, and then we'll jump into it. It used to be a 6-day course, and I consolidated it into a 2-day course, and now we've got a day and a half. So I'm not sure if that means I talk fast or we skip pieces. It's usually, yeah, so we'll just start. So thank you all for coming. This is wonderful to be here in Montana and actually doing a 2-day course in person. It's been a while since we've just done a course in person, so I'm really happy to have the opportunity to do that. I'm from Massachusetts. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. I grew up on an organic farm, kind of like a homestead. My parents were community organizers in inner city Boston when they met in the 70s, and my mother grew up on a farm in Illinois. And I don't think this is apocryphal, but the story goes, she said, the kids will be raised in the country, and you're welcome to come along if you'd like, because they sure ain't being brought up in the city. So this was late 70s, early 80s. The oil crisis and solar things like that was going on. I think around when Arrow was going strong, and so they built a passive solar sort of a house on a dirt road in a field, had a root cellar and a wood stove. It was not off the grid, but certainly no hydrocarbons involved in heating or cooking or hot water. Relatively back to the land kind of vibe. Grew up with milk cow and chickens and pigs and ducks and turkeys and orchard and vegetables. Like a lot of farmers, my parents were not able to make a living farming, and they had a day job, which was to run an organic farming organization called NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association. And so they just retired a couple years ago, but for about 35 years were actively involved in leading that organization. My mother was the executive director of the state chapter. My father was the editor of the journal for the 7-state chapter organization, and they ran the annual conference. So I basically grew up as a farmer homesteader, but also as part of the organic movement. And so that's just my background, for whatever it's worth, gives you some context. Certainly small scale, not like 2,000 acres of wheat or 5,000 acres of rangeland kind of perspective. So I don't have the experience of this landscape here, and I'll do my best to speak to what your dynamics are here. But that's my background and context. Through college and after college would basically be helping to manage the farm in the summertime and then traveling the world in the winter. I've worked on farms and lived in farms in Central America, in Siberia, in India, worked for the global anti-GMO campaign out of India, India country coordinator, and watched a lot of did some political activism work there, documenting farmer suicides and looking at what was going on as far as green evolution and GMOs and stuff like that. But spent a little bit of time in Himalayas, went on a bit of an esoteric quest early on when I was 21, so that colors my perspective, and you'll probably hear that slipping in as we go forward. I like to save the far out, the deep end metaphysics until the end. I try to hide behind science, Western science, as long as possible to appear to be legitimate in the quote-unquote current context. But it'll slip in over time. So when I got married and had found no better way to raise a family than on a homestead, set about trying to become a farmer myself, and rapidly realized that I, like my parents, was unable to make a living farming. And primarily that was because my crops were susceptible to infestation and disease. Things like pest pressure and disease pressure, people may be familiar with, powdery mildew or Phytophthora or Colorado potato beetles or corn earworms. I'm not sure what you guys have out here, but the pressure of insects and disease was such that my yields were limited, my economic viability was limited, and it was quite stressful. And so I had been brought up with this context or this sort of, I don't think it was even necessarily overtly stated, it was just sort of an assumption that organic was better. When we started the farmers market in the center of town in the mid 80s, we sort of had our noses a little bit higher than everybody else because they used chemicals and we didn't, and we were better people. And so when I started to try to make a living and realized that all the plants around me in nature were not being attacked by insects and disease, but all my crops were, I got to thinking about what is better. And I would say that nature, at this point I can say it with a little bit more context, but in general I would say nature knows what she's up to and is speaking to us on a regular basis whether we're listening or not. And being attacked by insects and disease is nature telling you that your crops are unfit. Not to put too fine of a point on it, but we can go into the biochemistry and everything else later. I think there's some pretty good reasons to say that. That nature will, I like to say they are nature's report card. She's telling you whether you're getting an A or a B or a C or a D, depending on whether you've got Phytophthora or powdery mildew or larvae of some sort or beetles. And only when you've got animals as your pests are you actually producing food for animals. So anyway, this was a realization process that started about 2005, 2006. And I got to thinking about it and said, maybe organic is better because we aren't using toxic chemicals, but maybe there's something better than organic. Maybe there's more to it than just not using chemicals. And so I started reading books and going to conferences, attending seminars in the wintertime and practicing in the summertime. And it really took almost no time at all of just a few modulations in practice, still operating within the organic certification framework, which I'm not necessarily wedded to, but I didn't have to leave organic to get to a point where pests and diseases disappeared on my farm, where I grew the same potatoes in the same spot that they've been growing for the last 20 years, and the potato bugs weren't there. I planted the cucumbers in the same spot where cucumbers had been, and the powdery mildew didn't come. And my experience was, when my plants grew and kept growing and kept producing, that my cost of production went down, my economic viability went up, and the ability to have downtime to play with my kids and take naps and now go around the country and blow my mouth off was plausible, right? I didn't have to work all the time to make a living. And so I got to the point of saying, really, I grew up on an organic farm. My parents ran an organic farming organization. And I didn't learn over that 20-year period any of these things necessary to become economically viable. And also, it seems, I think, correlate with increased soil health, carbon sequestration, increased nutrient levels, flavor, aroma, health. I've always been shy, and I try to hide it. I've got my facade I've developed over time so I can stand up in front of people and present. But I felt an obligation. I felt like this, there's something really important here. I don't quite understand what it is, but I know it's really important, and I need to start talking about it. And that was, so I started giving workshops at conferences, and that turned into courses, and that turned into an organization. And starting in 2010, we established the Bionutrient Food Association, which is a nonprofit educational organization whose mission is to increase quality in the food supply. And by quality, we mean flavor, aroma, nutritive value, health-giving attribute, which we think connects to soil health, farm viability, ecosystem function, human health, I would say cultural health, deeper consciousness, but organizing around the actual quality of the food as the objective. Not the label, not organic or permaculture or agroecology or biodynamic or regenerative is a new buzzword now, right? If anybody's been in the movement for long enough, you've seen these isms come, right? Local was a big one for a while. So regenerative is the one right now. Okay, great. There's good impulse behind it, good momentum behind it. It's kind of formally associated with soil carbon. There's a deeper stream to it, which is more about consciousness and culture and a way of being, which is awesome. But that also aligns with the permaculture community and the organic community and the biodynamic community. So what we said was, let's have our thing be the quality of the food. not the label or the practice, but the result. And can we have that be a high ground around which we can coalesce and integrate the wisdom and perspective from the different communities, as well as from the organic, so the conventional university chemistry perspective. Like, there's insights to be gained from all these different communities, but let's let the quality of the food be the objective around which to organize. So we were founded in 2010, like I said, and started out with workshops and courses, set up a conference, got local chapters, and did that for a few years. As we got to spread around the country, primarily through word of mouth. Somebody would attend a workshop in Colorado, or sorry, maybe Vermont, and say, hey, will you do one in Colorado? And we go to Colorado, and they attend one in Colorado and say, hey, will you come to California? So we got to go around the country and present these courses, and I call it Principles of Biological Systems. How did nature evolve things to work? What is the way that things have been working for hundreds of millions of years? How have plants been doing just fine without fertilizer and insecticide and fungicide and tractors and things for a long time? Because I think if we can understand that, we can actually, functionally perform much more well in relationship with the land. And as the work spread and it became obvious that yes, this is true, it does work in different soil types and different climate zones and different crops, et cetera, the thought was, is there some way to bring this to a broader perspective? If it's true that working well with nature actually builds soil and gives you as a farmer better economic viability and produces food that obviates the need for pharmaceuticals and medical devices, increases health. If it's true that working with nature has all these and many other sort of concomitant benefits, is there some way we can drive it more significantly? How do we take this understanding and perspective and bring it to a larger context? Apply it more broadly. And so the insight there was that money is a very powerful force in the world, for better or for worse. People make decisions based on economics to a large degree, and so if we could align economic self-interest with working with nature, then maybe we'd have a chance of doing something of greater significance. And so starting in 2016, we started this new project working on this topic of nutrient density. Nutrient density is a word that we basically helped to coin in 2008, 2009, 2010, as we were starting to have this conversation about the variation in nutrient levels in food. I remember when I started, we were talking about bricks refractometers. This is 2005, 2006. I went to the Acres conference. I found out about refractometers and Carrie Reams, and it's like, oh my God, how come I never heard about this? One little thing, and you can just squish a drop of juice, and you can see how healthy the plant is. Why did no one told me about this? In all the years, no one's ever told me about this. And then I was like, and it connects not just to the plant health, but to the nutrient values in the food. And I said, what's the word for that? What's the word for a carrot that is better than the carrot, this carrot's better than that carrot? And there was no word for it. There was no word for it. And so, it was back then at Acres, in sort of conversation with the elders, that we sort of settled on this term nutrient density and started using it. Initially, at least, the pushback was, maybe there's a 5 or 10% variation in nutrient levels in carrots, but it mostly has to do with the variety. Maybe the soil type, but it's pretty small. It's really negligible. My thought was, actually, I think it's probably a lot larger than that. I think we, with our tongues, people know about this. You're already wired with a very sophisticated nutrient monitoring device called your body, right? Way better than any piece of externalized hardware is going to be. Your nose and your tongue. Something like 30% of our DNA is associated with the function of your nose and your tongue. 30% of your DNA, right? Like we have a much less DNA, I think, than a fruit fly, or I'm not quite sure what it is. Like, we actually have very few lines of code in our DNA in relation to other animals, but other organisms. But 30% of it is associated with the function of our nose and our tongue. Nature thinks it's really important for us to be able to smell and taste well. And my understanding at this point is that's because a carrot that tastes good has a lot of things in it that are good for you, and a carrot that tastes bad does not. Right? It's actually not much more complicated than that. And a tomato that tastes good for you has lots of things in it that are good for you. And it tastes good, has things in it that are good for you. And a tomato that does not. It's that simple. And so when you get a tomato from the grocery store shelf that doesn't particularly taste like a tomato, it doesn't particularly have much in it. And so anyway, we coined this term, started popularizing it, and had been using that term as we went through the courses in the early 2010s and the organization, and finally got to the point of saying, okay, we've been talking about this thing for 5 years, let's do something about it, let's try to define it, let's try to bring this forward. So yeah, in 2016 had this concept, well, we'd actually been developing it over time, but the concept was basically, if we can give people the ability to choose what food they buy based on its inherent nutritional value, if the good carrots leave the shelf and the bad carrots stay on the shelf, then the buyers are going to go to the farmers and say, hey, actually, I want the good carrots, I don't want the bad carrots. And for better or for worse, that kind of a dynamic is going to inspire the farmers to focus on quality instead of quantity. Right now, the incentives are on quantity. You get paid, per bushel. You don't get paid for nutrient level. To some extent, you get test weight. Some small benefits for a high test weight bushel of corn and some detriments for a low test weight bushel of corn, but it's really not that significant.
And then they blend them together.
Right. They basically don't really give you a benefit for the good stuff, and they will give you a big dock for the bad stuff, and then they blend it all together, and then the ambient level is still quite low. We can go into the nuances of that, but yes. So the concept was, can we build a system where people have this ability to choose based on quality? And I'll just say, my background was, as part of the organic community, my parents were actually involved in helping to write some of the first organic standards in the country in the 1980s. And so I got to see firsthand, the certification labeling dynamic of organic as it's evolved over the past 35 years. When I was in 4th grade, I told my science teacher that I was an organic farmer, and she said, organic means contains carbon. All farmers are organic farmers, you silly child. And when I was in 8th grade, the LR scare had happened that previous summer, and I got back to school, and everybody knew what organic meant. Organic meant no chemicals. Something had happened, it hit the collective consciousness, and all of a sudden people knew organic meant doesn't have chemicals. So the definition of the word changed, and then it was probably 2 or 3 years after that when the government came in and said, actually, all you grassroots organizations that are doing this thing that's actually quite interesting, let's see if we can control that and have it be one unified thing. In 1992, they passed the National Organic, program. It took them 8 years to come up with a unified standard, but 2000, all the different organizations that had their standards and were based on their grassroots work had to basically align with the government or get out of business. And since then, we've watched, now it's okay for you to raise chickens without any access to nature, right? You can have blueberries grown in a hydroponic solution, or tomatoes. You can have pigs, indoors, and all be certified organic, right? So I've watched this concept of work well with nature, grassroots, good impulse be perverted by power and money. And so for me, in designing this strategy for nutrient density, part of the idea was, how do we develop a structure where it is really, really difficult, at least, if not impossible, for that to happen around food quality. And so these were the design considerations in 2016. We identified 3 things we wanted to do. One was, obviously, we need to characterize the variation in nutrient levels. We need to be able to say, from a biochemical standpoint, this is what a higher quality carrot looks like, or a lower quality carrot. We also need to build the instrumentation to be able to assess that quality, because part of the strategy is to say, we're not going to go with labels, we're not going to go with marketing, we're not going to go with certifications. In large part because that's a bureaucracy, but foundationally because it's not like you have good carrots and bad carrots. You've got a continuum of carrots. Some carrots are the 20th percentile, some carrots are the 40th percentile, some carrots are the 80th percentile. And a carrot may have been at the 40th percentile when it was harvested, but when you pick it up off the shelf, it may be in the 20th percentile. So how do you convey that understanding? Because what matters is what you have access to right now, not what it might have been at some point in the past. And so the idea there was you needed the ability to test in real time. So spectroscopy is the technology, a handheld spectrometer is the thing we identified we need to do is, can we build, not only can we characterize this nutrient variation in food, but build a instrument that can be used to assess it in real time. And our specs were it had to be handheld, consumer priced, open source, and non-invasive. So flash of light, non-destructive. A refractometer is great, but you got to squish the apple to get the juice out to get the reading. And you're not really allowed to do that in most grocery stores. So, not that a refractometer is not a great tool. It is a great tool, and it's really inexpensive, and it totally works. But from a logistical perspective, in the supply chain, it's not. It won't meet our design specifications. And then the third objective was to understand what causes that nutrient variation, to connect those nutrient levels with management practices, fertility programs, soil types, cultivars, epigenetics, microbiome, to be able to understand what the dynamics are that cause those nutrient variations so we can support growers, anybody who wants to, in a proactive way in creating that nutrient, in maximizing the quality of the food they're producing. So in 2017, we were able to build our first handheld meter. In 2018, we set up our first lab and started testing the first couple crops, carrots and spinach, and looking at those nutrient variations. We only looked at 15 elements and a couple compounds, polyphenols, antioxidants, calcium, potassium, sulfur, phosphorus, things like that. And we found it was like 3 to 1, say maybe calcium in carrots. So this carrot had as much calcium as those 3 carrots. And spinach, maybe it was 18 to 1 with iron. So this leaf of spinach had as much iron as those 18 leaves of spinach. So 3 to 1, 18 to 1, that was like the range on the elements, the minerals, and then it was the polyphenols, antioxidants, it was like 75 to 1, 200 to 1. So this carrot has as many antioxidants as those 75 carrots. This leaf of spinach has as many polyphenols as those 200 leaves of spinach. So it's not like this carrot is 5x that carrot, because it depends on which element you're looking at. This element is 3 to 1, this element's 8 to 1, this compound is 75 to 1. But regardless, that's the variation. That's the scale of the variation of the nutrients in food that we found. And we just asked people to go to the grocery store, go to the farmer's market, pull stuff out of your garden, organic, not organic, Maine, Michigan, whatever. Send us in what a consumer has access to. We weren't doing randomized replicated trials. We weren't sending different seed to different people and saying, do these different management practices, do side-by-side trials. We said, we want to actually survey the supply chain and see what's in it. And as an organic farmer, someone whose parents ran an organic farming organization, I can tell you, organic does not correlate with high quality, right? Organic does not correlate with high quality. Local does not correlate with high quality, right? The label does not connect with the nutritional value. What connects with the nutritional value is actually how it was produced. There's plenty of stuff on the shelf from big farmers from a ways away that's much higher in nutrient levels than the stuff at the farmer's market that's local, that's organic. But you cannot say local is better, you cannot say organic is better, because some people locally are doing a bad job. Right? Some people locally and organically are abusing their soil. And that's just a fact. You're following our certified organic practices, you live close by, and your soil's in bad shape, and your plants are not healthy. So it's not about the label, it's about actually what the process is, the relationship with nature. But we'll get to that in a minute. So that was 2018, we had our first lab, first couple of crops. 2019, we had our second lab at Chico State in California, and we started working with growers, and we said, we don't want just the crop, we want the soil the crop grew in. So send us the top 4 inches and the next 4 inches so we can overlay organic matter, biological activity, mineral levels in the soil, pH, with nutrient levels in the crop. And we also want the management practices. Did you till? If so, how deep? When? With what? How many times? Did you use cover crops? When did you plant them? How many species? When? How did you terminate them? What was your fertilizer program? What seed did you get? What was the variety? Where did you get it from? Did you use any inoculants? Did you irrigate? With what? How often? Like as many of those management practice details as possible, overlaid on the soil metrics, overlaid on the nutrient variations. So we started that in 2018 with 6 crops. We added another 20 crops in 2019, another 20 crops in 2020, and another lab in Europe. So we're actually looking now multiple continents, multiple states, all kinds of climate zones, roots, leaves, fruits, grains. And yeah, those variations are there across the board. It wasn't just carrots and spinach. It's wheat and oats, and it's blueberries, and it's apples, and it's leeks, and it's potatoes, and it's across the board. And every time someone sent in a sample of soil or crop, we took the little meter, the spectrometer, we flashed the light at it, and then we ran it through the lab. So we built a spectral data set. So by the end of the 2020 data year, we had calibrations for a meter. So now you can take the meter and you can flash a light at zucchini squash and you can get readings back, meaningful readings. You can flash a light at wheat berries and get meaningful readings back. You can flash a light at carrots or mustard greens. So yeah, in the past couple of years, we've been able to, I would say, complete that proof of concept of can you identify variation? Can you build a handheld meter? Can you connect it to management practices? And so, yeah, in the last sort of 12 months now, we've taken it to the next level, not just looking at 15 elements and 2 compounds and saying nutrient variations, but now we want to say, is this better or worse or decent? We don't just want to say, does it have more calcium and more copper and more polyphenols, which we think correlates with better nutritionally. We want to say, foundationally, this is a better steak, this is a bad steak, and this is a decent steak. So that's what we're doing right now with beef globally, is working on the definition of nutrient density. We would say that the past couple of years and all those other crops was nutrient variation. Now this is nutrient density, and so we're looking at 750 different compounds in a steak. So enzymes, vitamins, amino acids, lipids, polyphenols, terpenoids, elements, you know, a whole bunch. It's called metabolomics. And we're looking at the fecal material of the beef, of the cows for microbiome assays, and then we're looking at the forage and the soil, the management practices, so we can begin to say, actually, you know, this is a definition of nutrient density in a crop. So, yeah, initially, a lot more of the work was education and how-to for growers. Much more recently, it's been a lot about defining nutrient density and the instrumentation and the data structures and things like that. So that was a bit of a long introduction. I'm sorry for hopefully not taking too much time. But as I said, I like to start with questions. So this should give you some context. And this is usually a 12-hour course, and we have, I think, 10 hours. This first handout is short. The one for tomorrow is longer. And tomorrow we've only got 4 hours together. So if you give me all the things you want to talk about, I'll jot them down on the board, and then we'll jump into it and see where we go. I think the schedule is lunch at 12:30, and then call it an hour or so. Pick up again at 1:30, you know, break at 3:30, and then done for the day at 5:30. And then tomorrow it's 8. I think we start at 8, and we'll go till 10 for a break, and then 10 to 12, or 10:15 to 12. So, all right. Who wants to start with questions?
I've got a quick one. I don't know if it's going to be a quick answer, but.
I'm not going to answer right now. I'm just going to write it down.
Okay.
So I want all your, like, what's on top?
The people on the cattle.
Yes.
In the comparison between ones that have been treated with ivermectin insecticide versus not.
Yeah.
And the timeline between the treatment.
I'm going to fecal cattle.
The Brix meter, how you do it, and is there variations in the different species of vegetables or plants or whatever?
Just broadly bricks.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Which I assume we're going into, but how to get your vegetables from
Pest and disease resistance.
Yeah.
Yep.
Soil management.
That's the whole thing.
I mean, the vegetable, yeah, the whole thing, I
Like-
guess that is the whole thing, yeah.
How do you work with nature?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll write it off. Yeah. I'm not even going to write it down, because that's exactly what the whole 2 days is about. Yeah.
Perfect.
Fecal human.
Don't have anything to say about human fecal material. Haven't assessed it, or, I mean, we can talk about fecal material in cows, and I think but it's microbiome. It's about the microbiome. For the plants, it's really about the microbiome.
Oh, gee.
Yeah.
What specifically the changes that you made on your place?
I can refer to those as we're going through the
Okay.
process.
Yeah, who's in the room, so what are each of us hoping to do with this information? Some of us are probably growers, some are maybe, backyard gardeners.
Tell us what you want.
Well, I'm a backyard gardener and busy with a lot of different things.
Cool.
So I got some raised beds,
I can totally work with you. Somebody who's got 2,000 acres of wheat and they get 5 inches of rain, I'm not sure how much I can talk. Backyard garden, we can dial you in. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I'm the one that you referred to, because I work with growers who are 2,000.
You're a consultant, working with
No,
growers?
I'm an agronomist.
Agronomist, yeah, yeah,
So, but my focus is on field crops,
yeah.
in dry land mostly.
So this presentation is called Principles of Biological Systems, and it's how did nature evolve the system to work? And what are the things that nature needs for the system to work? And how do we manage for them? So, well that'll be like my first hour is like, these are the overarching environmental conditions that if any of them is not present, things stop working. And that's what I never learned. I never learned like what nature needs to function well. And I think in many cases we do things that are counterproductive because we don't know any better. And actually we could save ourselves money by stopping doing those things and things would work better. So
Is that cycle similar to Elaine's or?
similar to Elaine. I like to, I'm on camera, so it's just gonna be, I think,
pass.
what's that?
You can pass.
You can pass, I get it.
No, I think the point is to integrate the wisdom from as many communities as possible.
Exactly,
And to have nature be the answer,
correct.
right? So Elaine has offered some really, really, really important pieces of the puzzle. So did Albrecht, so have the indigenous communities, so have, people talking about, cover crops. We can learn from all these different perspectives. But the real answer is not who has the most web hits. The answer is, what's the best flavor? Like what causes the best flavor? Yeah,
What we're calling forever chemical?
not true. Microbes can are magic, have magic powers.
What we're calling them,
I don't know what's called forever chemicals. You're talking about toxins that are applied that have long half-lives?
Yeah.
So what's the
What does it show up in the body? And
what's the question?
How does nature deal with it? Or how do we manage to deal with the,
So toxin,
long-
toxic load or,
yeah,
or, yeah. Toxic load. Yeah,
I'm a community food advocate.
Yeah.
I don't have science, I'm not a grower.
yeah.
Just could you please keep in mind, what is it that I need to know in order to support my farmers growing nutrient dense food? As you go through this.
I'll try to. Yeah, I mean, basically these concepts that we can verify in science are in almost all cases deeply intuitive, and can be conveyed in the most lay language. So that's what I try to do is like hide behind the science and say, look, guys, it's all totally intuitive, and you already knew this. Just trust yourself. Indigenous communities globally did a really good job managing ecosystems for thousands of years, way better than we're doing, with no PhDs, right? It's not like you need the science to do this because it's all actually how you treat your children or how you should treat your children and your parents is basically exactly the way you should treat nature. And it's not just external, it's also the sense, it's the sensing, it's the feeling. And so, I mean, a lot of us have not been brought up with that. We've been trained to externalize and to, listen to someone else, and the answers are in a book. But really, I think most of the answers are within. It's just about tuning back into that. But anyways, I told you I wouldn't talk about metaphysics until tomorrow.
I've got a few. So weed litigation.
Weed, yeah.
I know that this is all about soil, but specifically working with clay and substrate soils.
Yeah.
And then wildlife, incorporating wildlife in terms of while we're developing and working our farms or ranches or even backyard gardens, how do we make sure that we're not essentially colonizing the wild spaces, allowing the ecosystem to continue to be the ecosystem?
Okay, integrating. sort of the ecosystem. Health. Yeah, beautiful.
At some point, and I know this isn't the point of your talk, but I'd like to hear about what you feel you need to get your spectrometer to the next level.
Millions of dollars. We have everything else totally dialed in. The big issue with what we're doing is it's open source, which means it cannot ever belong to anybody, which means no one can profit off of it, which means investors can't get a return. So that means we need people who are coming from a broad-minded perspective to be behind it. And the logistics of raising millions of dollars a year from small donors and people who mean well, while simultaneously trying to get the job done, is a pain in the old rear end. Yeah. Well, we can talk, I'm sure the meeting will come up. You said you had multiple questions?
That was it, I just got them all out right there.
Oh, bam,
Thanks.
okay, that's, yes.
What if there's anything that you've learned going along talking to people doing these talks that like, for the super harsh environment that we're in here for market gardening, the cold, hot, crazy,
Yeah.
high desert stuff that just makes things like using tarps and things just, not that using tarps is necessarily good or whatever, just, it's just anything that you've heard to help.
If I'm not giving you practical information for your climate dynamics, then I'm a waste of your time. So, yeah, what would that be? That would be climate extremes or for market gardens, it's actually a much easier deal than for a 2,000-acre farm. I mean,
Well, yeah, my parents have the 2,000 acre farm. and
yeah,
everything.
if you've got a market garden, it's really, I mean, because of the amount of money you can make on an acre, the things you can do then become many more. But yes, climate extremes. And then how to systemically address them for the whole bioregion versus how you can monitor and manage them in your immediate bioregion. Yep.
I'm wondering if you have anything to say about how ways of adapting in the event of a global disaster, like
Which one?
Like yeah, right. Well, you know, nuclear war,
Yeah.
lots of radioactivity, even if it's not strike. You know,
Yeah.
that in particular, extreme climate, extreme droughts.
I think we could turn the climate around pretty damn fast. I don't know about radiation. I mean, that's a bigger issue.
Ideas about, I don't know, like what.
So, I mean, from my mind, I feel like we have the solutions for climate, for health, for consciousness, for, I mean, cultural revitalization broadly, I think, you know, what can be accomplished pretty rapidly through working more well with nature. I'm not too concerned about that. I haven't, I mean, the radiation thing is really just coming on the radar in the last couple of weeks, seriously. And so, I mean, there are things out there with mycorrhizal fungi and stuff like that, and I think, I'm not sure if it's boron or selenium or something like that. I haven't
Seaweed, I think.
tracked down iodine, and there's a few things that, but that's not, yeah. So addressing systemic issues.
Really be keeping up with the changes or staying ahead of your ecosystem changes.
Well, ideally, taking responsibility for changing our ecosystem back to what we want it to be. You know, what 40% of the continent's land surface has been desertified through the practice of agriculture in the last 10,000 years. So 40% of like all the continents, that's a decent amount of space, was green, now is brown, through human action. If we can break it, we can fix it. So my strategy is not to like, oh shit, it's getting drier and more extreme, like how do we just like hunker down, but like how do we just own this situation and turn it around?
Leave the beavers alone.
What's that? And if it can take a little while for the beavers to reproduce, then get out there with some excavators and start digging ponds.
Just did.
Because that water cycle thing is so powerful. Anybody doesn't know about the water cycle, like ignore carbon. The water cycle is the thing that can turn this whole thing around so fast. And it just involves not letting it run off the land. It's really, 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 really simple.
So if you think about it, the beavers were gone 50 years before the settlers got here, so the landscape was normal to them, which was not normal in the first place.
And the actual Native Americans were gone
Yeah.
long before the white people came, so we didn't actually, I mean,
We didn't pass the baton.
well, what was being done, anyway.
Yes.
Keeping a live root in the ground.
Keeping a
Live
live,
plant.
keeping live roots in the ground.
Cover
Was there a
crops
question
and-
there or just a statement?
No, I'm asking on managing cover crops and
Okay,
succession planting or whatever.
yeah, live roots. All right. Yep,
So, when you started off your presentation, you said that your family couldn't make a living farming, you couldn't
Yeah.
make a living farming.
yep,
And a lot of this we see works really good at a homesteading situation, or in a backyard garden, or.
it works on any scale you want.
Right, so that's what I'm interested in. is
Yeah.
How do you put that into a scale to where we can market it? I mean, we have our cropping systems, we have our grazing systems, but we have a food marketing system that's failing, in my opinion, right?
Yep.
But it'll be interesting to see how you tie all that into that food system.
You can tell me by noon tomorrow whether I've succeeded or not.
Because it.
Nothing like a good farmer to
Right.
say, nice kid, but not worth your time.
It'll also be
Yeah.
interesting because you've had 4 or 5 years of these studies of the soil along with, so probably you guys have a pretty good idea right now, if a producer explains to you how he handled his soil,
Yeah.
what the quality of that food's gonna be. You probably have a pretty good correlation of that with your results coming.
People say stuff.
Yeah.
You got to get out there and look at it.
But if you're getting your soil and all that
Mm-hmm.
together with that end product, you're getting a correlation, right?
Yeah.
On that, so your
100%.
spectrometer that you're developing,
Yeah.
you probably already have a really good idea
Mm-hmm.
without the spectrometer of how that ground was handled to the end product of that. No?
Yes and no. I mean, there's so much that has to do with the context of the individual piece of land. And the practice, I cover crop, come on, that's a massive continuum of when did you plant it, who did you plant, what happened, what did it rain or did it not rain, did they germinate, what did you do to them afterwards. So, I mean, the problem with any of these terms, like organic, is it's just too vague. And it doesn't actually mean much in the actual lay of the land details of what's happening. So, I mean, the foundational thing for me is the intention of the farmer. What do they say? The best fertilizer is the farmer's footprint, the farmer's shadow. Like you being out there and sensitively discerning. I mean, I always tell the story about, my wife would say, what are you doing today at the farm? I'm like, I don't know. I got to go for a walk. Like, I've got a few ideas of things that, I gotta pick the tomatoes, of course, because I haven't picked the tomatoes in a couple days, but like, once you go out there and you see where things are at, in my experience, you're shown what needs to be done today. And if you're not engaging in that way, if you're not actually sensitively based on, I don't know, it always is different. Where's the moon at? I don't even know how to explain what the things are that are causing what I see to happen. I got some ideas, but what I know is, having been a farmer for long enough, I know what needs to be done today. And if I don't do it, a week from now, things aren't going to be what they would have been. And I can do something a week from now still that will be keeping things from being what they could be 2 weeks from now, but there was that sensitive thing I should have done that I didn't do. So, I mean, that really is what it comes down to. We can hide behind meters and labs and numbers and practices and stuff like that, but I think it's about getting to that point where you are just listening to your land, if I can say it that way.
Right, and we can't expect anything more than what our nature. Doesn't matter what region we're in or what climate zone we're in or what moisture zone we are in. We need to look out at what our nature has and then grow to that. We can't, without artificially growing a lime tree in Montana.
Growing lime trees in Montana like you're doing.
I mean, out in our production commodity size.
Let me get into the principles, and then we can go into it. It's because I don't want to spend too much time at 30,000 feet because it doesn't really do much good. I feel like we maybe have enough questions here. It's kind of a short list, but you guys seem like you know what you're up to, so I don't need to waste time on details. Yeah.
I didn't see the water cycle. I heard you mention water cycle, and it sounded really important. So if we could talk about the water cycle and just water in general.
Yes, and water in general.
Yeah, water quality too.
I'm like, I don't know how you guys do it out here. 2 inches, 5 inches, whatever. Not enough. Yeah.
Last question, did somebody ask about, the current gold rush on the buzzword of carbon cycle and, how everybody's running in to try to make money off it?
No.
Can you
Do
just
you
keep that in mind?
offer my commentary on the topic, or?
It's a
So,
big issue here.
carbon markets, would that be
Carbon
carbon?
markets, it's a big issue in Montana
Yeah,
because you've got a lot of land.
yeah. I definitely have some comments on that topic. All right. This is great, because I generally, these days, give shorter presentations and don't have time for all my rants and riffs and things, so 10 hours gives a little bit of room for commentary. Okay, so I generally start my presentations with a stick figure plant. And then I put some green leaves on it, just because it's a stick figure. So I like to say, foundationally, most of us can agree that plants are green. I'm walking you down a little forested path here, so we're gonna say yes, 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 and you're gonna end up in places that you weren't prepared to end up. Plants are green, yes? Right, okay. The greenness, they say, is this chloroplast in which occurs the thing called photosynthesis. You've heard about this one?
Yep.
Yep, the recipe, they give you the recipe is CO2. This black is just not up for the task. CO2 plus H2O equals oxygen plus sugar. Ever heard that one? We've heard that the oxygen goes out of the atmosphere, out of the leaf into the atmosphere.
Yep.
And we breathe it.
Yep.
All right. So, all fairly safe statements. What I never learned in 8th grade science, when I learned about this one, was what happens to the sugar in plants in nature. I heard about the, what was it, ATP, and I don't know if everybody remembers all this stuff, but as I understand it from the literature, the majority of the sugar produced by plants in nature is the caveat, the important point. A majority of the sugar produced in the leaf is taken and brought down to the stem, to the root, and injected into the soil. And it's not actually just sugar that's injected into the soil, but I'm simplifying it just a touch. We can go into nuances if you want. So the foundational point here is that plants the world over, of all types, cover their bodies in greenness to make stuff that they then inject out of their bodies into the environment. Which, if anybody's heard about, what was his name? Evolution? Survival of the fittest. Is bad strategy, right? It's really bad strategy to cover your body in stuff, to build your body to do things that you then take and kick out of your body. Give away, right? Like that's not the I win by having more control model. That's the I win by sharing model.
Well, unless it benefits, unless there's benefit back.
Which is nature's model. So this is the foundational point here, is that nature does not win by controlling, nature wins by sharing and symbiosis. There's a number of points I can draw from this, and I will, but the first one I'd like to make is that part of the reason that plants do this is because they, like animals, can't digest their food. Anybody heard about this one? You can't digest your food. It's only the people inside of you that can digest your food for you, right? When you're born, there's a grand total of 0 people between your mouth and your rear end. The alimentary canal has no one in it. The passage through the birth canal, the consumption of colostrum, the first thing that comes out of the mother's breast after birth, before milk, is there to establish your gut flora. People heard about this one?
Your first brain.
What's that?
Your first brain.
Your first brain. What percentage of the cells in your body are human?
Very few.
Very few. Less than 10. Right? 90% plus of the cells in your body are not human. So anybody, we have this whole thing about identity, like I am a man, I'm a woman, I'm not either, I'm, Native American, I'm indigenous, I'm white, I'm brown, I'm yellow, I'm purple. Like, everybody's assuming they're human. Right? This whole thing about kingdoms, like the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom and the fungal kingdom, and like, actually, if 90% of the cells in your body are not human, then we need to step back in our identity conversation about, are you actually an animal? Or are you an ecosystem? Foundationally, we're ecosystems. We're a symbiotic ecosystem. We're a nested set of symbiotic ecosystems in relationship with each other. This reductionist paradigm is it's a flawed lens. So it's the same with animals as it is with plants. Plants can't digest their food, right? For the last 300 million years, before God invented fertilizer, I think that was in the sixth, which one of the first 6 days that God invented fertilizer on?
We did the cows.
What's that?
We did the cows.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking about triple superphosphate. But, plants have been doing just fine for a long time without fertilizer. And it's not because, whatever. It's because they had evolved a symbiotic relationship with microbes, right? The reason plants cover their bodies in greenness to make sugar is to feed the microbes who then actually have the faculties of digesting the soil and digesting the atmosphere and feeding it to the plant. So one of my first statements I like to make is, I don't care whether this is a carrot or tomato or wheat or apple or alfalfa. It matters a grand total of 0 to me. What plant we're talking about. People talk about, well, broccoli needs this and wheat needs that, and no. What they need is a healthy gut flora. Nobody was adding nitrogen fertilizer, 10,000 years ago or 10 million years ago. Actually, minor point, anybody know about this one? We're told about legumes having the ability to fix nitrogen through their little nodules. People know the story with the azotobacter and the rhizobacter. And some people buy the inoculant spore and they spread it, they put it on their alfalfa seed. Anybody hear about this story? Yeah. And they mix actually this element called molybdenum into the azotobacter and rhizobacter. Yes, you know about this? Some people don't know about this. Molybdenum at the center of the nitrogenase enzyme. I'm using fancy words, but too fast. I think it's 1 million pounds per year of molybdenum are mixed into the bean and pea inoculant because it didn't work without the molybdenum. Anyway, the grand point here is all plants have evolved the capacity in working with microbes to fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere, right? Like, you don't need to add nitrogen because they've already evolved the capacity. Plants have evolved this function. Everybody's got this functional capacity. I've got a few rules on my farm. One of them is thou shalt not kill an insect. The second one is thou shalt not kill a disease. And the third one is thou shalt not add nitrogen. I don't do it. If nature doesn't do it, why should I do it? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The point here is you got this area around the plant root. It's called the rhizosphere, where the vast majority of life in the soil resides. And the vast majority of life in the soil resides in the vicinity of the plant root because that's where the food for the microbes are coming from. And that's where the digestion process of the nutrients from the soil is occurring, and that's how plants get fed. They feed the soil life feeds them. So to the point about it doesn't matter what kind of a crop you're producing, what matters to me is how healthy is the microbiome. How well functioning is the, that ecosystem of bacteria and fungi, et cetera. And so the principles of biological systems is what do we need to do to create an environment where the microbes are happy and functioning? Where the bottom of the food chain is functioning, the middle of the food chain will function, and the top of the food chain will function. If the bottom of the food chain is not functioning, then don't expect the middle of the food chain to function. Right? We're at the top, animals are on top theoretically. It's a big cycle, but who cares? Plants are in the middle, microbes are in the bottom. if your microbes are not happy, you're going to be dealing with all kinds of issues with your plants, right? What do they say about like solving the, fighting the disease versus solving the underlying problem, right? Like if you're dealing with pest pressure, if you're dealing with disease pressure, and you're busy trying to kill the insect or kill the disease, you're missing the point. It's like cancer treatment, you know? You don't kill the cancer, you heal the person. I mean, you can kill the cancer and maybe that person will stay alive for a little while, but systemically the objective is to build vitality and health. And you don't do that by killing the problem, you do that by building the solution. So this is like what I spend the next probably hour on, are what are the basic environmental conditions that are necessary for the bottom of the food chain to flourish. So I'll start with air today. Microbes, many of them, a large number of them, need oxygen to breathe. And so if you have tight soil, you said clay, if you got tight soil, if air can reach as far down as 1.5 inches, and below that there's no air, then anybody who you would like to be alive down here is dead. And if you can't deal with that, then don't waste your money on fertilizer. Don't waste your money on irrigation, right? You can spend money on stuff, but it doesn't. It's a waste of time and money if you don't solve this underlying issue of aeration. So there's all kinds of different strategies for addressing this systemically. Let me just use one example from my sort of homesteading small farm, perspective, and then we can talk about a few others. This is why farmers till, in many cases, because the dirt is tight in the spring, and crops don't grow when the dirt is tight. Right? You got to loosen it up. Ideally, it's soil, it's not dirt, and you don't need to loosen it up. But foundationally, if you don't have air in the ecosystem, that's a limiting factor, and overall function is not occurring. So, my personal example from the homestead experience is with garlic. Anybody here who's planted garlic in the fall? Usually we plant our garlic in the fall, end of October-ish. We'll be pulling out the fall carrots. Maybe middle of October, we'll come in and whatever carrots are left, you pull them all out, you stick them in the root cellar, sell them, whatever you got in your stockpile, you can sell them out through the winter. Good money, in my experience, winter carrots. I mean, how many pounds of carrots can you produce in an acre? I don't know, 40,000 buck a pound. That's $40,000. If you can sell them for $1 a pound, tenth of an acre, hell, whatever. So you're pulling your carrots out. It's middle of October. You get your garlic ready to go in. You make your beds. You put your garlic in. What we do generally is we mulch it after we put it in. We use mulch hay, but you can use, I don't care what you use. And so historically, it used to be that we would have the ground freeze in the beginning of November, and then snow would set in, and then snow would leave in the middle of March, and the ground would unfreeze by April 1st. And, beginning of April, the garlic's starting to pop up. That's what it used to be when I was a kid. Now, the ground does not necessarily freeze. Well, it does freeze occasionally, but the snow definitely does not settle in for the entire winter. But that's tangential. The point is, end of March, beginning of April, if you were to go out there, let's say it was a half acre of carrots and a 1/4 acre of garlic. So we pulled out that half acre of carrots, we planted a 1/4 acre of garlic. We got the spot where it was carrots and we didn't do anything, and it's garlic, and we planted mulched. Now, if you take your hand and you pull that mulch apart and you reach down, underneath that mulch where the garlic's coming up, what you're going to see, or you can look, first you can see these sort of piles of worm castings, and then you can reach down and you can pick up a handful of soil, and you can smell it, and it smells like soil. And then 2 feet over, like just right there, it's dry, it's cracked, you can't reach your hand into it. If you could shovel it up, there's no smell. They both went through the same amount of freezing, thawing, snow, rain, whatever. One is soil and one is dirt. One's got air in it, one doesn't. What's the difference? What caused that difference is the soil life was able to eat. They had food. So, minor point. I grew up on a homestead where we didn't buy stuff. We bought grain and beans and salt, pepper, I think. There's a couple other things, but pretty much all of our meat, all of our dairy, all of our vegetables, all of our fruit, we grew, and then when it was ready, we harvested it and we ate and sold, and then we froze and canned and lacto-fermented and root cellared and dehydrated. So in the middle of February, we're having a beautiful, amazing, looks like a Thanksgiving dinner. It's just called lunch, all from the farm, none of it picked fresh. Well, maybe we got some salad greens coming from the hoop house, but most of it, frozen beans or broccoli and potatoes from the root cellar, onions were hanging, meats from the freezer, you know, frozen fruit. We stockpiled the food in the fall, so we had food to eat in the winter. Now, when the green leaves are no longer green in the middle of the winter, who's feeding the microbes?
It is.
Right? If you don't have stockpiled food present in the environment for the microbes to eat, they don't hop a plane to Florida in the winter, right? They still are there and they need to eat. And if they don't have food to eat, they starve to death and they die. And then it turns from soil to dirt, right? The structure of the soil comes when you have life in the soil. And when you create a reality where life cannot exist because it didn't have air to breathe or didn't have food to eat or didn't have water to drink, right? That's foreshadowing. You need water to drink too, right? Take a kid or a chicken or a pig and don't water it for a week and tell me how it's doing. Microbes are the same way. So foundationally, by maintaining food in the environment, we had the plants feeding the soil life in the fall, the green leaves feeding the soil life, and then we came in and mulched. We were able to keep food in the environment so the soil life was able to stay alive through the entire year. And that actually is what kept it soil and not dirt. So this is where cover crops come in. This is where the living roots, I'm not sure where Patty went, she's over there. Ideally you want things alive, not things dead, as much as possible. But putting in cover crops, so I'll again use the small farm example. Say it's end of July, beginning August, and you got a tomato patch. Frost is coming by end of September, beginning of October. Your tomatoes are good 3, 4, 5 feet tall, right? They're well established. Maybe you guys don't have rain. We have rain, but what I would do is I would take my cover crop mix and I would go out and broadcast it underneath the tomatoes in the end of July, beginning of August, and get it established. So when the frost comes and kills the tomato plants, I've got an understory of cover crops that's 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall, that's going to keep growing. And by the time it stops growing in the beginning of December, it's 3, 4 feet tall. Snow, whatever, knocks it over. You don't have snow either, so I don't know. Some years, a little bit. Maybe strong winds will knock them over. I don't know. You've got food for the microbes for the entire year. And that's the thing. Where in nature do you see bare soil? Right? Not where she's doing well. Not where she's doing well. So anything that you do to keep the soil uncovered is a violation of nature. It's like we can fairly, basically say. We had this thing about Mother Nature. She's a woman. You say she's modest. She likes to keep herself covered. If you're actively engaging in a dynamic where you're ripping her clothes off and keeping her uncovered and exposed to the elements, that's a violation of your mother. Think of it that way. If you want a visceral, emotional kind of impulse, whatever it takes. You need a logical justification. You need an emotional justification. You need a philosophical justification. From a foundational standpoint, I say, what does nature do? Some people say, what did Jesus do? That's actually not a bad principle to follow. Not that everybody does, but what does nature do? Nature keeps herself covered. So anytime you're engaging in a practice or series of practices which are violating that, you are setting into motion negative effects. I've got another rule in my farm, which is I want to see my soil less than 2 weeks of the year. I understand that there's periods of time when I need to be going from one crop to another. I understand I need to prepare a seed bed of one type or another. So fine, I have to engage in tillage or soil preparation. I do engage in tillage. I've got a tiller in the back of my tractor. It's 4 feet wide. I use it about that deep, right? I don't go down 6 inches or 8 inches or 10 inches. I go down an inch, a half inch, inch and a half. If you understand that the microbial ecosystem is ideally is deep, 8 inches deep, you can come through and you can do your bed prep, your soil prep, and have the benefits of being able to seed into it. For me, salad greens or carrots or something like that. And if you're doing wheat, maybe that's not an issue. You don't need to have, a well-prepared bed. But it's not that I'm philosophically opposed to tillage. It's just that we have to engage these practices sensitively and thoughtfully and in context to the overall dynamic. If I've got things growing, whatever it is, it's 2 feet tall, I'll come through with a mower, mow it down. I'll come through with a tiller, shallowly prepare the bed. I'll broadcast my seeds. I walk along, broadcast my seeds, rake them in. 36 hours they're up, right? I got 2 days. There were 48 hours of time when that soil was uncovered. Great. I got 12 days left for the year I can use for something else. And for me, the winter time counts too, right? Even if there's snow on the ground, if I could see underneath the snow, if there's nothing covering the soil, then that counts as bare soil. So I want to make sure I've got something covering my soil, 351 days of the year.
Are you still trying to keep your weed pressure down, or are you seeing those as cover crops? Or as a root mass?
Weeds and cover crops may just be a way of defining terms.
Correct.
So, we think that we're putting in plants to keep the soil covered. Nature thinks she's putting in plants to keep the soil covered. We're like, you're wrong. Those are the wrong plants to keep the soil covered with. We're going to use these ones. We can debate about logistics of, how insidious things are. But again, if I've got tomatoes or kale or winter squash or whatever growing, what's a dandelion? Not going to bother me. Some dock is not going to bother me. Thistle, not really.
Nature cover crop are carrots.
It depends on how tall they are. I mean, so white clover is a great understory, right? I mean, so which plants nature's using for cover crops can tell you a lot about what the imbalances are in the soil, right? So, what's that?
Bindweed.
So what you guys call bindweed is one that has a rhizome?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's something different than what we call bindweed, but I'll start with the deep-rooted guys, like the thistles and docks, and do you guys have any of those?
Yes.
Right.
Bindweed is deep.
Is it taproot?
It's like
No,
morning
no.
glory.
Morning glories is a rhizome.
Yeah.
That's a different one.
That's what I'm talking about,
Okay.
about morning glory.
So
Canadian thistle is a big issue in the grain crops.
Compaction.
I was walking across the lawn over here, and I'm not sure what exactly it was, but it had prickles on it, and I'm pretty sure it's got a taproot. So anybody that's got a taproot is nature telling you the soil's compacted. Anything that's got that shape, that's going straight down and just trying to is when people talk about using turnip, daikon, right? The daikon, people say we'll use a daikon to crack open the subsoil. In my experience with tight soil is the daikon grows up, right? It don't go down. Tight soil, like, hey, I can't fit. But dandelions and docks and thistles, they drill right down. So anybody who's telling you that is telling you subsoil compaction is your issue. And so, actually, I was supposed to start with air, and I got distracted moving on to water and food. But there's the rippers, right? Those deep subsoil rippers, the yeoman's plow. I mean, those are mechanical techniques that you can use to crack open subsoil compaction. And so that might be a much more intelligent use of money than fertilizer if nature's telling you that subsoil compaction is your issue. So I would be reading the weeds and really thoughtfully trying to understand what they're telling us.
But it makes sense because we do have a ripper that we're on 30-inch beds and we just use the box blade tines and we rip before we plant. But where we put the cover, the heavy compost we made, thistles have not come back.
Yeah. Anyway, so as far as the guys with the rhizomes, as I understand it, oftentimes you will have tight soil there as well, and oftentimes it's if it got worked when it shouldn't have gotten worked, that's part of it. I think it's oftentimes a boron and calcium deficiency. Functionally, I'm not sure what your basic, soil base cation saturation is of calcium, magnesium around here. Anybody know the?
There's lots of calcium.
Plenty of
but it's
calcium?
Not planted or available.
Not plant available.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your boron level?
It's low.
Low. So boron is one of those elements that's like so exquisitely important, and it's at the beginning of this whole biochemical pathway of boron facilitates silicon, silicon facilitates calcium, calcium facilitates blah, blah, blah. Right? All these different elements, there's this whole biochemical process, and boron is like at the beginning of it. Boron is an anion, which means it leaches, which may not be much of an issue here, but I think we're generally looking for 3 parts per million of boron. I will probably be talking about mineral balancing after lunch. That's the section after lunch. But I would say in general, addressing, if we're going to be leaving here with a few like notes of things to do, boron is an element that I would probably recommend you address deficiencies of. And I think 3 parts per million is my target. We'll talk about how to do the math and how much to apply. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, somebody told me that I could use borax
Yes.
for boron in my vegetable garden.
100%.
That's okay?
Yeah. Max application 30 pounds per acre,
Okay.
which is about 1 pound or 3/4 of a pound per 1,000 square feet.
So you're talking about sort of oxygenating the soil, feeding the microbes, and when I'm thinking about how compacted, I'm restoring 3 generations of overgrazing, and literally it's a clay deposit from glacial Lake Missoula. So when I mean clay, I mean like
Proper.
we've got legit clay.
Yeah.
The only thing I was able to plant as a cover crop that actually took was turnip.
Okay.
Daikon grew straight up.
Yep.
That was some peas took in certain areas. I think I planted about 8 to 10, probably 8 acres of pasture with very, very, very poor results. And so I'm curious what you would recommend. I was just kind of shooting from the hip of what I was going to plant this fall as a cover crop.
So there's different ways to address the compaction issue. One is mechanical with rippers. Another one, if you're dealing with straight clay, so should I keep all topics to like when I'm planning on talking, or can we just like, you guys okay with jumping around and?
Yeah, we can jump around.
You can.
We can jump around.
I prefer to go that way, but some people are like, no, we'll do minerals in the mineral section. So usually you end up covering all the bases. If you just engage the people, I prefer to engage you. So there's this thing with the clay platelets. If you look at the structure of clay, it's got this like, that's the structure, right? Sand is boxy. So what you want to do is you want to be pushing these clay platelets apart. So you want to be basically making it go like that and like that. You want to be basically, it's called flocculation, that's a technical term. You want to be flocculating the clay. And there's this thing called the cation exchange capacity. People may be familiar with this cation exchange capacity. You've heard of it? There's the negative charges and the positive charges. But basically, you've got a calcium attached, and you've got a potassium attached, and you've got a magnesium attached. And that's the base saturation, if you're familiar with the Albrecht model and base saturation. So the situation here is that, so sodium, I think it's potassium, magnesium, and calcium are the base cations, are the basic elements that are sort of attached to the soil colloid, attached to the sand particle, or attached to the clay particle through this positive negative charge. This is like basic agronomy, basic chemistry. The situation here is that sodium is little, potassium is bigger, magnesium is even bigger, and calcium is actually really big. So what you want to do is you want to get these bonding sites, you want to get calcium attached to the bonding sites. If you can get calcium to bond in here, it's going to actually cause your clay platelets to open up, to flocculate. And so this is where gypsum is your thing. So calcium sulfate is SO4. Gypsum is a great. Gypsum is it's loosely bonded. The calcium sulfate is not like limestone. where it's, you know, it's hard for that calcium to become available. The gypsum, the calcium sulfate and the gypsum, that calcium will basically be able to bind with the soil much more readily. So I think what they generally say, even if you've got a high base saturation of calcium, 500 pounds to the acre, 500 pounds to the acre of gypsum is a really powerful technique for facilitating flocculation in tight soils. There are other forms of bioavailable calcium, but that's probably one of the least expensive. I'm not sure how much it costs out here. I mean, sometimes it's like $10 a ton or $20 a ton. It can be really, really inexpensive. Bioavailable? Bioavailable.
There's some calciums that don't do anything.
Some limestone will just sit there. Depending on, it's about what the compound is it's in. Some compounds break apart really easily, and some compounds don't break apart very easily. So
it's just a topical application?
Broadcast, yeah,
And then,
before the rain ideally.
It's heavy though, so it'll drop pretty quickly, won't it?
Well, the rain will, water is going to be what's causing this to integrate. I mean, there are arguments for tillage at certain points in time. I will say on my farm, when I started my farm, and I bought my land, it was very tight, very light in color, no aroma, no earthworms, and I understood that there were a bunch of things wrong, like there was no air, and the mineral levels were really bad, low pH, right, really low pH, so no minerals basically. Not a lot of microbial activity. So I got all the stuff that I thought my land needed, I broadcasted it out, and then I took my tiller and I went back and forth about 8 times. Threw my kids on the back, threw some rocks on top, it was bouncing, right? It was just bouncing, like, doom, doom, doom. It was so, I didn't have the proper equipment to get in there. All I had was a tiller. And so I got down about 3 inches after 8 passes. And it was little chunks, right? But then I made my beds, and then I put my drip tape down, and then I planted, and then I mulched, and about 6 weeks later, it was dark. It had structure, there was earthworms, it had aroma. Like, if you get the environmental conditions such that nature has what she needs, things transform in basically no time flat.
One thing with the clay, with ours anyways, we catch it at the right, we're not a lot of acres, but we catch it at the right moisture and we put anything in it. Like if the rain comes over, we lay 24 hours and the top gets not sticky and we can plant right into it, no problem.
Yep. There's all kinds of nuances about energetics and, subtleties and things like that. But you guys probably don't have the issue too much, but working the land when it's too wet is a killer move. Like, that destroys things. So anyway, I am
do you have a
getting
recommendation
off topic.
for cover crop in addition to the gypsum?
Not off the top of my head. In general,
If turnips worked, then do it again?
yeah. I would say, are there things that nature's planting there without you doing anything? And what's their pattern? Is it a broadleaf weed like a pigweed or a lamb's quarter? Is it a deep-rooted taproot thing? You want to be looking to see, because nature pretty much is doing what she can to address the imbalances, whether you're, getting in the way or helping out or not. Like, what she plants there is usually for a reason. And there's a weed seed bank of lots of different types of plants, and whatever the environmental conditions are appropriate for those plants, they'll germinate. So people have this idea of, like, we want to get rid of the weed seeds. I'm like, don't even waste your time. Like,
So what about mulch alone? Or mulch with the gypsum? We're in an 8 to 10 inch rainfall, right? So we don't get the moisture probably to carry the gypsum down, especially if we're in an 8-acre plot that's planning on irrigating. So
mulching an 8-acre plot's
maintain the moisture to.
Mulching an 8-acre plot's a lot of mulch. On any kind of scale, mulching is not your strategy. On any kind of scale, cover crops is your strategy, I would say. And in general, the principle of cover crops is as many species as possible, as many families of plants as possible, right? You want to get that diversity of ecosystem function. One of the other rules is, about what does nature do, is she doesn't do monocultures, right? Nature does not do monocultures. Nature does polycultures. And so as much as possible, integrating polycultures into your system is the foundational objective. And that means if you're growing wheat as a monoculture as your cash crop, then when you're doing your cover crops, do a polyculture. right? I'm not saying thou shalt not do a monoculture. I'm saying do polycultures as much as possible. And so your cover crop window is the opportunity to do that. And there's all these people that are actually starting to figure out how to do polyculture cash crops and harvest their cover crops, right? I mean, there's all kinds of really, really cool stuff people are starting to dial in, which is taking this to the next level. I'm not so well versed that I can give all those examples, but that is definitely the trajectory. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, I have a small greenhouse.
Yeah.
What's the best strategy, do you think, over the winter? I mean, usually I've just kind of ignored it.
That's the worst thing to do.
Right. So would you like plant something in there?
The winter time is the time when you make the most money off the greenhouses.
Watered? I mean, in this climate, it's
How cold does it get?
It's 40
very cold.
We
I
get
mean,
40, yeah.
You know,
We get 15.
I mean, it's
But-
small.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's heated at all.
Yeah, I don't hate mine.
But should I be watering in there during the winter? Should I?
If you, at any point in time, the soil dries out, the microbes die. So, absolutely, you want to be maintaining moisture throughout the entire growing season. People will do that where I come from. In the heat of the summer, they'll be picking their onions in August, and they'll set up some tables in the hoop house, and they'll dry their tomatoes their onions in the hoop house on tables, and the soil is powder. And then they'll go in 2 weeks later and plant their salad greens into what was powder. And I'm like, guys, it's dirt, it's not soil. And so if you want your plants to do well in that environment, they should be, and April's the same thing, right? I mean, if it's April and you're not planting till May, and it's really, really dry, the soil's really tight and hard and dry, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna prepare the soil, I'm gonna put my irrigation down, I'm gonna plant, but you're planting into dirt. So as much as possible, I would mulch it. Keep it moist. We don't have the issues with lack of water that you do. But I mean, you can do a lot with 2 or 3 layers of row cover. What is it? It's the end of September now, so we're getting late. But my general target is to plant my salad greens by the fall equinox. If I can get things seeded, between the end of August and the 20th of September, and I can get the hoop house covered by October 1st, you can get them germinated and started growing. With those a little metal hoop and some remay, some flexible row cover, 2 or 3 layers of that, things will grow remarkably well. And
Like she's saying, if she missed her window, at a minimum, put something cover crop down, or not cover crop, some kind of.
You're at the edge of the window right now, but I wouldn't give up on that. I wouldn't give up on it. If you got, what do you have in there now? Do you have stuff in there now?
Well,
No.
she could be planting cilantro. Cilantro's just going to seed now. So I kind of modeled what plant I grew and now it's going to seed and it's going to come up again. Like that.
Well, some things are more cold hardy, and some things aren't. So
Yeah.
what are the cold hardy things? The brassicas.
Cilantro's pretty cold.
Are you trying to make money? You're trying to feed yourself. How much cilantro do you need to eat? How big is the hoop house? How much money do you want to make? Do you live in a local food desert? Right? What's the access to fresh fruits and vegetables? I love to go out to the hoop house in February and take my shoes off, take my shirt off, take my shorts off. It's warm in the hoop house. There's 3 feet of snow outside. It's cold outside. I'm in there barefoot. I'm picking salad for lunch. Right? I'm sunbathing.
That's pretty cool.
It's really fun.
That's awesome.
It's a totally good feeling.
Yeah.
Who needs to go to Hawaii or Florida?
Bigger puddle.
It's just, you smell the earth and it's just so invigorating. So, yeah, the remade, the row covers, you can do a lot. You can do a lot to keep things growing. And even when they freeze solid at night, if you're oriented east-west, which means you're broad to the south, that sunlight coming in will warm things up in there. And they'll thaw out and if they don't grow, they'll stay there. So, yeah.
What's the difference between it gets really, I live in Helena, Montana, and grow mostly perennials
Yep.
for my farm. What's the difference between the snow precipitation and that moisture kind of, we get into fall, there's now gonna be a little bit of rain, the soil's gonna start freezing for some levels, you mulch over stuff, I'm not watering that all winter long. as far as I know. Do you have something like, I guess, I don't want all the microbes to die, but I don't know, it seems like there's some more natural cycling with the deep, deep winter, where maybe we're not. I don't know if that.
Temperature, I mean, microbial activity is affected by temperature, right?
Yeah.
So they really, really, really slow down as it gets cold. But what happens, I mean, what's happening these years is it warms up. And so we used to have, the ground would freeze and it'd stay frozen for 4 months. Now, and we'd have snow on top. Now it freezes and then it thaws, and you can have like a nice layer of mulch on the soil going into the winter. But by January, it's gone. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yeah.
The mulch is gone.
Yep.
So that means your microbes are alive. That means they're eaten, and now they're hungry. So what I'll do in my garden, if I went in with a nice layer of cover crops, or maybe it was my lettuce that went to seed, and I was like waiting for it to grow to seed, and it was just got the seed, and I didn't get any cover crops in because I wanted the lettuce crop to harvest, and there's not a lot of biomass in lettuce plants, and so it doesn't take long for the microbes to eat that all up, and then so I'll just take a round bale of hay and I'll just roll it out in the field. For me, it's really important to keep that soil covered. I talked about that, keep the soil fed. So I will literally go out with round bales of hay in the middle of the winter when I see the soil cover disappear, because I want to keep my soil life fed so that when I'm planting in spring, they're alive.
Which in turn will hold that snow or that rain longer on top of that soil.
We have no issue with maintaining, yeah.
She's talking about the snow. So if you had the mulch, that'll hold the moisture there better than the.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Bare soil wicks, the wind wicks the moisture out. If you got some kind of cover there, it keeps the wind from wicking the moisture out. Whatever you got, yeah, it's the worst idea possible is to bare fallow if you want to maintain soil moisture, right? They do it in California. They're like, oh, we're gonna maintain soil moisture, we're gonna bare fallow. Like, you guys, if you don't, I mean, you laugh, but no, that is the way it is. And stupid people plant cover crops because cover crops use water. That's the mentality. You guys are laughing.
Well, that's what the.
No, we are not laughing. We see it every day.
That's still very.
They do it here too. Yeah, no, it's, yeah, anyway. Okay, I'm sensitive to time. Does anybody have the time? Yeah, so we got half an hour.
It's 2 minutes to 12.
Perfect, half an hour. I have digressed a reasonable amount, not too much, I hope. We've sort of talked about the first 3 things. I want to cover all 5 of them before lunch. We've got half an hour, so I'm gonna, where's my? Every now and then I have to stop taking questions and just sort of bust through some stuff. Oops, that was the part I wanted to keep. What was that? That was oxygen, food, and water. So I started talking about the mulch and the garlic. I think I talked about the rippers. I think I talked about the gypsum. So these are some basic thoughts about maintaining aeration, just concepts. Again, I'm not from out here and I don't understand all the dynamics of your climate and soil type, but at least these are some concepts. So maintaining aeration is a point. For food, I talked about cover crops. I talked about mulch. The basic point is, having things in the environment for the microbes to eat at all points in time is a foundational aspect. Water. We've talked about water. One thing I do like to talk about, which, I guess it sort of ties into the water cycle stuff, but it's just an interesting point anyway, is this thing called a tidal force. And again, I don't know what you guys' water table is like. I'm guessing it's probably not too close to the surface, but where I come from, the water table is actually not too far below ground. People heard about the tidal force? The moon and the tides, that tidal force. I guess the sun's involved too, right? So you have the high, there's like the big tide and the low tide, and there's the sun has gravity and the moon has gravity, but basically, if you stand right at the edge of the continent, right, exactly at the edge of the continent, 2 feet in, you'll see the water will go up and go down over a 12-hour period, right? It'll go up and go down, go up and go down. So we understand that the water goes up and goes down based on gravity, at the edge of the continent. My understanding is gravity still applies on the continents, that the gravitational effect of the moon and the sun applies here too. It doesn't just apply in Massachusetts. And so what that means is the water table, the point at which the subsoil is moist, goes up and goes down twice a day. And as I understand it, this is how nature irrigates. You ever know what irrigating from below? You put your house plants, and instead of watering them from on top, you're supposed to put them in a pot and they'll suck up the water they need. You ever hear about this one?
Yeah.
Apparently, nature does this. Nature does this twice a day. She raises the water table and then lowers the water table. And there's a couple really interesting things that happen here. So it's through capillary action. You know, if you spill some water on a table and you put a napkin on it, and you'll see the water will wick up the napkin. That's called capillary action. The size of the water molecule and the size of the paper napkin are such that it moves. And so that'll happen if your soil has good structure. If it's not tight clay, if you've got that balance of air and structure, the water will literally move up and water your roots, and then it'll go back down again. And as part of that process, as it fills that pore space, it will push out the air, which in this case is a lot of carbon dioxide, because there's a bunch of people down here that are breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. Everybody following me? So basically, the earth is breathing, it's pushing out the carbon dioxide, the water's coming up, the carbon dioxide is being pushed out, and then the tides go down, and the oxygen gets sucked down, so basically there's this.
Lungs.
It's a breathing process. It's a breathing and it's a drinking process. So if you've got good soil structure, if your ecosystem is in some decent level of balance, if your water table is somewhere close to the surface, your nature will water your plants and will aerate your microbes twice a day. Now, this is what happens in nature. Nature does this. As we get plow pans, as we get shallow-rooted crops, we don't have deep subsoil, rolls. As we have annuals and not perennials, right? This system begins to break down. But have you seen at the Land Institute? Maybe people know about the Land Institute in Kansas, where they've got those perennials and they've seen those, how deep the roots go down, right? Right. And as above, so below. So when you are overgrazing rangeland, and basically the grass is really short, like the roots go down as far as the tops go up. And so this is part of the wisdom behind the holistic managed grazing stuff, the savory stuff, is you want the plants to get tall, and then you graze them down and you stomp some stuff in, and then you come back again, 3 months later or 6 months later, depending on your climate zone. But the act of letting the plants get tall above ground also means you have the roots getting tall below ground and facilitating that soil structure process, right? They're cracking open, they're knocking it open. If the water table is 10 feet down, they're able to access it. This is where nature doesn't do annuals, right? What nature do? Nature does perennials. There's some annuals in the ecosystem, but there's a lot of perennials in the ecosystem. And so another thing that we do that is out of whack with how nature does things is we constantly maintain an annual ecosystem. Okay, it is what it is. What are the things that the perennials do? Part of what they do is they have this deep root structure. And so bring your cover crops in. Rye is an amazing thing. Rye's got deep roots. That's an annual cover crop. We can make up for the imbalances that we're building through our cropping strategies, but understanding foundationally that nature maintains the hydration of the soil, not just through rain coming down, but through, the water table coming up. So A, that's an important concept. B, if your water table's too far down, you got trouble, right? All the game's off. It's not going to work. So this is where part of the wisdom from the permaculture community is relevant. The permaculturalists talk about stockpiling water high on the land. if you get 2 inches of rain a year, I guess, I mean, I don't know what you're gonna do. But if it does rain, if somebody said there's, you said there's gonna be an inch or 2 of rain where you live coming in the next 2 days, what you wanna do, if you've got grade on your land, is you wanna be digging ponds and stockpiling water as high on the landscape as possible, and then having more ponds and then more ponds, right? You wanna be basically digging it out so water never runs off the land. I think about in areas like India, where I have some experience, and I know they have big, long periods of no rain, but they also have periods where they have lots of rain. And so you get that monsoon that comes through for 6 weeks or 2 months and drops 35 inches of rain. And then for 10 months they have no rain. Well, capture that 35 inches, stockpile it in ponds on the landscape, and that water high in the landscape, in the ponds, will basically work its way through and functionally keep your water table high. Does that make sense? Again, I don't know if that's plausible or realistic in your ecological context, but I do see lots of hillsides around, and I don't know I haven't been here when it actually is raining to see what happens to the water. But I know, like in Arizona, when they get 2 inches of rain, it goes hauling off, right? There's floods and flash floods. So that's what you want to be capturing, is the flash flood water. You want to have a system in place, strategically developed in a proactive fashion, so that never happens, and that is how you maintain your water table on your land.
And we should be planning no water from June to September, and mentally, I mean, we'll get a thing here or there.
Right. So, but then if you do have what would be flash floods at some point in the year, and you can, with your mini excavator or your beavers or whoever, get out there and be building these pools high on the land. Have you heard about what's his name from Australia? No, but he's brilliant. He's from Austria. Yes, and maybe not familiar with Sepp Holter's book.
Yeah, Jeff Lawton.
No. Yeomans. P.A. Yeomans. The father of this work, like, Lawton certainly learned from him, but Yeomans is the one who, as I understand it, figured it out. I mean, not that obviously any white person figured anything out. We're just remembering stuff. But looking back to Yeomans' work, and that was what they were doing. He was stockpiling water and then having it move horizontally across the landscape with the Yeomans plow. So there's wisdom here in the permaculture community about how to do that. And so again, I don't necessarily need to go into how that affects the water cycle. We can talk about that later, but it is really important because of the process of facilitating cooling and allowing the ambient temperature at ground level to be much lower, which does all kinds of other beneficial things.
The hard thing about that is traditional monocropping in agriculture, because Sepp Holzer was in Bozeman about 10 or 12 years ago.
Okay.
And he said, we were in a field just north of there,
Mm-hmm.
and he said Bozeman and our whole Montana area is on the verge of desertification. And
Yep.
I could give you the examples. He said there's so much water coming off the bridges and it's not being used properly.
Yes.
He said there's enough that it could water all that
Yep.
space north and way, way out into the valley.
Yep.
But because of inappropriate use.
Exactly.
we're
That's
missing out.
exactly the point. And apparently there's this thing called water laws you guys have out here too. I've heard about these things.
Water rights.
Rights, that was called water rights, whatever it is. Like somebody 150 years ago said, that's mine.
Yep.
And everybody else is like, okay, that's yours. Like,
That's not runoff water, that's river water, I think.
That's in the.
That's
runoff.
I think there's
There's
both.
a definition that we're.
There is. Yeah.
Well, my understanding is, at least I know in Colorado, I was just in Colorado a couple days ago, like, you can't collect rainwater off your roof because that's not your water. That belongs to the senior water rights owners.
Yeah.
Which is,
I'm like diving deep in literally in this exact thing right now, and it depends. So for the Clark Fork River drainage,
Yeah.
we've got the Bonneville Power Company that has rights to all of the Clark Fork River drainage, including our rainfall, as it turns out.
which is now time for civil disobedience.
Right, we don't enforce it.
Good.
Up here too much.
Well, then let's everybody start digging holes and start stockpiling water, because this is how we reverse climate change. This is how we, this is strategically how you regreen the West. If you don't do this, you guys are toast. End of conversation, right? And it's coming towards us. I mean, Appalachia, we're safe for a while, but it would be helpful if you guys would take care of stuff out here so we wouldn't have to worry about it. And it's getting really tight out here. This is how you do it. This is exactly how you do it, is you stop that water from running off and you have it percolate in and it fills the water tables and green things start growing and those green things make clouds which make rain. It keeps it cool and you shift the climate. You transform the climate, you cool the climate through this act. This is the water cycle piece.
And it's a lot of, there's interest in leaky weir. So, kind of a beaver dam accidentally.
Yes.
And doing that in.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So you've got a stream that's coming down. I mean, we were driving up here.
Yeah.
I mean, all the way up here. I'm not sure it was 15 miles or it felt like a really long time on the dirt road. And there was a stream coming through.
Yep.
Right. That stream could have 85 beaver ponds on it that are all backed up and affecting the water table. And I'm sure there's some point in the year when those beaver ponds are all going to get filled up. The whole thing's going to get filled up because it's going to go over the top. And then you're basically holding the water, and that's filling the water table.
Which you have the hydraulic pressure with water too, though, that pushes out from the hydraulic pressure of the water.
But if all the water, hauled off in March and not much of it's left, then you got much less to work with. So the point is, proactively establish a dynamic where it can be captured when it's coming and kept on the land, and that is going to solve a whole bunch of systemic issues.
And that,
But you're getting
because it's
involved
legal
in
for the beavers to do that, but it's illegal for you to do that.
And the point we were discussing last night is, at what point do we take matters into our own hands?
But we should also, though, say through our managing practices, building the soil health, retaining the water, and recapturing in 2 or 3 inch events, we can do that and keep that water on my ground.
Yep.
Legally.
I don't care about legally, I care about ecology. And so the bridgers don't belong to anybody, then get up there with some friends. What are the areas that are national lands, that are not private lands? Right? There's civil disobedience, like get some kids that actually care about the fact that they are not going to be able to have kids and want to have kids, and explain to them the situation and say, you go hiking in the mountains, okay, this week we're going to go here, next week we're going to go there, next week we're going to go there, and let's start getting up there with shovels and digging this out and stockpiling this water. I mean, we got to...
If anybody that wants to see this concept is talking about, they just came and picked up the backhoe yesterday. We just finished this whole thing. We can pass water almost a mile, well, not quite a mile, but a half a mile, or not that big, from one end to the other. It's freaking phenomenal. It's awesome.
And Sepp Holzer was out here, and he talked. That's awesome, because Sepp Holzer from Austria absolutely understands these things.
And it's in the definitions. There's a difference between a pond and a hole. Big difference.
And you need to know it because you're touching on some serious, Montana, wolves in water are 2 ways you get yourself killed. Like, it's serious here.
But the power is within your sheriff. So if you understand it, have that conversation with your sheriff, because they can't.
Do you get to elect your sheriff?
Yes, everywhere, yeah.
Okay, well then, I
We need to
don't call it civil disobedience.
Our soils to infiltrate,
But
not run off.
it doesn't do any good if you don't have the water.
I think all these pieces are part of the puzzle. All I want to say is this is a really important piece of the puzzle. And maybe I'm a radical and whatever, so don't do civil disobedience. Go to the proper channels.
Civil disobedience, just understand.
Elect your sheriff. But coming together around this topic systemically is in everybody's best interest.
Yeah.
Education, engagement, activism. This is your systemic issue out here is water. It's your systemic issue, and the solution is at hand. It's not like you're screwed. It's just that you haven't organized to build the solution properly.
But also,
that's the point I want to make.
What she's talking about, Bob put in this nice fancy pond on his place.
Yep.
And his soils are so that when it rains, it doesn't hit the pond. It all goes down. It doesn't even run into the pond.
So it's yes and.
But he's storing it.
Mm-hmm.
If your soils are functioning.
Yep.
Well, and there's a difference between rate of dissipation also. you're storing water if it's sitting on the land. So if it's in the swales or it's in the soil and it's disappearing within an hour or two of the rain because your soil's that open, you're not storing water.
What's the name of the?
But that's your-
It's going into the water table.
Yeah.
What's the name of the gentleman in Australia who do?
PA Yeomans.
Is that who you would tell us to go to if we're looking to build appropriate ponds and engineer them according to our needs? Is that the resource you
TZER?
would tell us?
Don't use the word engineering.
I personally have never studied this. I just have a piece of land with a stream running through it, and I rent a mini excavator every so often, and I work on my ponds. I've read Sepp Holter's book. I'm familiar with Yeomans' work. There's a.
So those are the two resources that you would recommend?
These are people. I mean, the beavers. What was anybody? Judy Schwartz's book. Anybody read? What's that?
Leaky weirs or.
Leaky Weir. I mean, I haven't heard of
It's a
that.
man-made.
Someone
beaver
that's
dam.
more accessible is Zach Weiss with Elemental Ecosystems. He's Sepp Holzer's like approved person, and he's from Bozeman, but he goes all over the world now and digs these big water.
Beautiful.
So Elemental Ecosystems is the company.
Everybody taking notes on
And they're
Monroe's
doing
space.
trainings and
Perfect.
yeah,
Perfect. Perfect. You got a local person who knows what they're doing.
yeah.
Don't look at me. Find your local
Yeah,
person.
he knows about Montana.
Perfect.
What's his name? Contact. Zach Weiss.
Zach Weiss, Elemental
Elemental
Ecosystems.
And he has a really good TED talk out on the water cycle, exactly
Beautiful.
what you're talking about.
Beautiful.
Reinforce this.
Beautiful. Awesome. Yeah, find your local people who know better. I just know that it's a really important piece of the puzzle, and I would be remiss if I didn't emphasize the point. I think I have. I think we can move on. All right. We're running close to 12:30. I can feel it coming. There's minerals, which I touched on. I think I talked about molybdenum and the nitrogenase enzyme a little bit. Talked about boron a little bit. Luckily, the next section after lunch is minerals, so I can touch on more on that after lunch. And then finally is life itself. So with minerals, if you don't have the necessary elements for biochemical systems to function, they break down. I'll just use one example here, which is cobalt. I'd like to use this example. Some people have heard of vitamin B12. If you are a vegan or vegetarian, you may have been told if you go to a doctor that you should supplement your diet with a B12, pill or shot. Anybody heard about this one? Story? Yes. Because your plant-based diet, quote unquote, does not have enough B12 in it. I would say you can get a plant-based diet with lots of B12 in it if you have healthy plants, but if your plant-based diet is based on soybeans and grains that are grown poorly, you probably don't have enough B12. So yes, you should be supplementing your diet. If you don't have enough B12, you become lethargic, you become anemic. If you really don't have enough B12, you become dead. Like, we need a certain amount of B12 in our bodies to be alive. The element at the center of the B12 molecule, the molecule is called cyanocobalamin, is cobalt. Cobalt is an element on the periodic table like calcium or potassium or sulfur. You need one atom of cobalt at the center of this compound to have B12. If you don't have cobalt, you can't have B12. So you can say we are cobalt-dependent organisms because we need a certain amount of cobalt in our body at the center of this compound, or else we're dead. Many of your soil, I would say probably your university soil recommendations do not include cobalt. If you send it off to, Montana State or University of Montana, I'm not sure who your land grant is, but if you were to send a soil report off to them, I doubt they would be recommending cobalt as a mineral amendment, be targeting certain amounts of parts per million of cobalt in your soil. However, 80% of the species of soil life are also B12 dependent. So you can have all of the air and the water and the food present, but if you don't have any cobalt present, you don't have any B12, you don't have the microbes. You can do your Elandingham compost teas, you can do, I don't care what kind of inoculants you use, you can inoculate, you can have air, you can have water. If you don't have cobalt present, they won't live, they will be dead. They simply cannot exist. So it's an example of one of many minerals, one of many elements I used boron as an example earlier. We need them in the totals of like 1 pound per acre, 2 pounds per acre, 5 pounds per acre. Right? It's not a lot. And once they're there, you don't need to keep adding them. But if they're not there because of historical dynamics, this is a limiting factor. This one thing will inhibit the overall system from functioning. So,
Is it okay to add without knowing if it's missing, or do you need to check so you don't overly do it?
I generally think it's good to test ahead of time. Depending on your scale, it's an economic consideration because buying cobalt sulfate is really expensive and you don't want to be wasting $20 an acre if you don't need it. So taking that soil test for a 50-acre lot and then saying, okay, I need this much, it would be strategic. We'll talk about how to address these things after lunch as well. You can buy cobalt sulfate, and then there's a naturally occurring raw materials like rock dust and sea salt and things like that, which I think are also very exciting. Yes?
So was cobalt then pretty universal, and then how did we lose it? It must have been everywhere, it must have been most soils, apparently, if life depended on it.
Well,
right?
I made, I think, one or maybe two very, very light statements at the very beginning. I said, life has magical powers. And so I could talk about this all the way at the end of the course because hopefully at that point you think I'm somewhat legitimate and you listen to me. But
at this point, just test and get it in there.
There are lots of ways that minerals show up.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways that minerals get denuded. So the landscape is nowhere near as vital and vibrant as it was 500 years ago. And lots of things that were present then are not present now.
That was behind my question, is not a real, it's kind of a, amateur layperson, is that I hear about these recommendations from the scientists, and I have the skepticism about uptake and whether or not you can put it on there and it's actually going to be taken up by the soil.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be a skill in using this stuff in a way that it actually gets used, as opposed, like taking your vitamins and you get flushed down the toilet. You have to be able to.
Most of them come out the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be able to absorb them, and that's a whole other.
So minerals topic is after lunch, and I go into all this stuff: how you source it, how you make it bioavailable, how much what you want to pay, how do you want to, Yes, this is I have a whole section on minerals. So we'll do that then. Life, again, I have a section or a piece in the handout this afternoon about life and the microbes, so we don't need to spend too much time on it right now. But foundationally, it's a biological system. And in many cases, based on historical dynamics, the full spectrum of species that was present is no longer. And so if you don't have those species present, it's like the snakes in Ireland. Apparently, when St. Patrick got rid of all the snakes, and now there's no snakes in Ireland, like, you need to have a boy and a girl to have, snakes. And so we have no more rhizoctonia. Like, if there's no rhizoctonia in your soil, the rhizoctonia is not going to reproduce. So getting the rhizoctonia back in, ideally you do it once. Ideally, you just need to inoculate once with a spectrum of microbes. But if you don't have that full spectrum of species present in your environment, they're not going to be able to reproduce, they're not going to be able to go through their cycles, they're not going to be able to be that bottom of the food chain. And so oftentimes I will say to people in a course, I will maybe be recommending a whole bunch of things that you can be doing, but if there's one thing you should take home that's like the least expensive, least effort, biggest bang for your buck, it is to reestablish a broad spectrum of microbes in the environment. Foundationally, if they're not present, all bets are off. I like to talk about, I think I talked about the colostrum at birth. You need to have your gut flora well established at birth or you become a colicky baby. Anybody heard of a colicky baby? Heard of or actually heard a colicky baby?
I was one.
You were one, right? If you're a colicky baby cow, right? If you're a calf that doesn't get its colostrum. Anybody ever been in like a cow barn where it's like that? It's just like this really sharp, piercing, like absolutely you can't ignore it. Right? That's nature's alarm system. That's nature's fire alarm. That's nature's like, whoa, something is wrong. That's the fire truck, that's the police, that's everybody all going off at the same time. A crying baby, right? It gets all the way down your spine. You can't think of anything else. A colicky baby is one whose gut flora is not well established. At birth, whether you're an animal or a plant, if you don't have your gut flora established, you're going to have all series of dysfunctions going forward. Right? You are not a plant, you are not an animal, you are an ecosystem. I made that point as well. Only when you have that broad spectrum of symbiosis established is it possible for the rest of the life cycle dynamics to occur. And so getting a full spectrum of species present on the seed at germination is a very, 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 very important piece of the puzzle. I've heard of this thing that happens apparently sometimes out here, where people put like fungicides on seed. Have you heard of this? No, I'm serious. You've heard of this?
Yes, it's well,
We're laughing because it's horrible.
No, in fact, I've been told in some cases you're required to. Like there's laws about it. Like you're not allowed to plant seeds if they don't have the fungicide. I'm not sure which states this is in. In some parts of this country, I've been in places that go, yeah, you have to. Like what are you talking about? You have to.
What's the purpose of fungicide?
They're afraid of fungal pathogens.
Stuff that kills your wheat.
I don't know. So if you've got a sick plant, if you've got a weak plant, right? Nature's got a garbage crew. This is what the dynamics are, right? Nature's like, you are not fit for reproduction, and so she sends in the fungi to take care of you, the fungal pathogens. That's not a disease. That's nature getting rid of that which should not be reproducing, right? We don't understand that nature's talking to us, and we're like, this is my crop. I'm going to kill the fungus. If you manage the dynamics appropriately, that exact species is a symbiote, right? It doesn't have to be pathogen. It's just responding to the environment and saying, you're not fit for reproduction, you're out of here. The dynamic is that people will put these fungicides and things on their seeds of their crops, which is exactly the opposite of what you want to be doing. That's like giving your kid antibiotics at birth. Instead of giving him colostrum, you're giving him antibiotics. Right? Foundationally, that's a profoundly destructive act in the biological process. And so, as far as I'm concerned, establishing gut flora at birth and then being able to maintain it is really, really an important piece of this puzzle. So, all right, I think I've covered the basic principles here, or the basic environmental conditions we're going to be managing for. We've got lots of other topics to go into in depth to go into it, but I think we're close enough to 12:30 to take a lunch break. Yes, Robin, anything you want to say
Sure.
before we break, or not?
Yeah, so you ready to break? We could break for lunch.
Yeah.
It'll
I
be
like-
out, I just have to put it out, it'll be out in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Just a couple.
Housekeeping?